You've been here for 2 years, a patient of this institution.
After everything I've seen here, Doctor, you really think you're gonna convince me I'm crazy, huh?
Martin Scorsese's Shutter Island is an artistic, complicated, and moving film that opens up the conversation of understanding mental illness. Protagonist Teddy Daniels, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, is a U.S. Marshal supposedly brought onto Shutter Island to solve a case of an escaped patient. But after stranger and stranger events begin to unfold, Teddy realizes the truth of his reality resides in a tormented world of psychosis and paranoid schizophrenia.
Are you real?
Scorsese ensures the audience is thoroughly convinced their unstable protagonist is a sane man until about the last 30 minutes of the film, when he uses the shock and confusion of a twist ending to speak about the often jarring and unpredictable experience of mental illness and insanity. Some critics consider Shutter Island an at times accurate, at times melodramatic, exhaustive critique on the American health industry. Philip French from The Guardian delves deeper, comparing Shutter Island to Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho and Samuel Fuller's Shock Corridor, by quoting Scorsese himself and saying the film affirmed that America had become an insane asylum. To develop on this notion, Scorsese hopes to speak to what it means to be insane in 2010, when Shutter Island was made, versus what it meant in the 1950s, when the film takes place. Shutter Island returns to the 1950s, a period known for its exploration of mental illness, to construct a double disorientation for the viewer. Firstly, in the film's psychologically driven plotline, and secondly, in its conflicting fusion of the schizophrenic art cinema mode, which embraces cinematic abstraction, and the new Hollywood blockbuster mode, which embraces immersive physics and simulations of indexicality. By intentionally leaving the audience in the dark and allowing the perception of assumed reality to manifest, Scorsese forces the audience to experience and empathize with insanity firsthand, and subsequently creates a hybridized art blockbuster cinema that is both abstracted and indexical. Though the 1950s are not typically thought of as an accepting period for mental illness, the foregrounding of mental illness is often seen in 1950s literature and cinema, reflecting societal anxieties as well as the commonality of institutionalization. Though hesitancies and prejudices were more than apparent in the 1950s, the efforts for better education on mental illness begin to emerge, and in cinema, topics of mental illness begin to appear more frequently. More recent cinema often chooses the 1950s and 60s to showcase the common barbaric practices and horrific treatment of mental illness in the past. Shutter Island relies on this context of progressivism and moving away from traditional institutionalization and treatment. At the same time, it highlights stagnation and the shifting but not bettering of living conditions and the continuation of antiquated practices. The conflicting nature of this time period is expressed through the film's form and its colliding of the new Hollywood blockbuster mode and the art cinema mode. The film's characteristics that make it a new Hollywood blockbuster include its plot-driven deadline narrative, its polarized feelings of lightness and heaviness, and its intense reliance on sound and bass. However, it is also a film belonging to art cinema, because the narrative is psychologically motivated, the sound and aesthetic is often ethereal and dreamlike, there are a multitude of dream sequences and hallucinations creating fragmentary space-time relations, and the ending is left ambiguous.
Aren't they beautiful?
The clashing of these two vastly different genres creates a dynamic that is, in itself, schizophrenic. At times, reality seems perfectly stable, and the events are tangible and palpable, but then, almost unnoticeably, hallucinations interject, and the viewer comes to realize that perspective cannot be trusted. In the opening sequences, Teddy remarks jokingly,
"You act like insanity is catching."
This foreshadowing is seen over and over again when both the protagonist and the viewer realize Teddy is a patient on Shutter Island, and the whole case was a charade to shed light on the ludicrousy of his delusions. This shocking revelation invokes a baffled and incredulous Teddy on screen, and results in a mirrored version of this reaction from the audience.
What the fuck is going on here? You working for him?
This mimetic reaction the audience experiences speaks to its new Hollywood blockbuster impulses, with its open vulnerability to leave room for a sense of awe and wonder at the spectacle that is the blockbuster. However, the film's tendency toward art cinema creeps up on the viewer as well, as they achieve an imaginative variation of what is happening on screen, with an active process of becoming, as the viewer's reality is simultaneously shattered along with Teddy's. Insanity seems to have caught onto Teddy's reality as well as the reality of the viewer experiencing the film. In this sobering end sequence, both the viewer and the film itself are implicated in an active exploration of the misunderstanding and mistreatment of mental illness in the 1950s.
After she tried to kill herself the first time, Dolores told me she had an insect living inside her brain. She could feel it clicking across her skull, just pulling the wires just for fun. She told me that. She told me that, but I didn't listen. I loved her so much.
The reactionary twist ending also speaks to and critiques the persisting psychiatric and societally driven misconceptions surrounding mental illness today. From a psychiatric standpoint, it is still unknown what the best forms of treatment are for mental illnesses. For instance, in the film, Dr. Cawley spoke of past methodologies of treatment and his attempts at deviating from these methods to find a new solution. While in the past they relied on lobotomies and shock therapy, today, arguably as destructively, they rely heavily on pharmacology. Likewise, the societal misunderstandings extremely prevalent in the film, like Teddy's denial of Dolores' illness and former patients' poor assimilation back into society, are just as relevant today as they were in the 1950s. Ultimately, Shutter Island's art blockbuster take on the true nature of schizophrenia is jolting, moving, and even humbling, as the audience walks away visibly shaken and left with a new perspective on what insanity entails and what reality appears to be.